So I'm joined now by a long-time activist from Bath, John Bampfylde. But John, just to clarify for listeners, you've got quite a strange spelling of your name. I suppose that's a bit rude to say strange, but it's quite awkward. In other words, if people put Bamfylde onto the internet, they won't find you, will they? How do you spell your name?
Bampfylde.
Okay, so that's John. He's joining us on Dialect today. Now, you're a long-time trade unionist. How did you first get involved? Your earliest membership of a union, and why were you attracted to the unions?
I come from a long-time Labour family. I grew up in a Labour Party family, and this was a time when the Labour Party was more than it is now. I lived on a council estate, and my dad was the ward secretary. But in those days, this was back in the 50s, the Labour Party didn't only do political stuff, it was social, so they used to organise mass Christmas parties and trips to the seaside and stuff like that.
Well, I can remember that. Actually, where I come from in South London, you sometimes get invited along to the Labour Party Christmas do, and it was quite a big event. So is that still happening in Bath or not?
No. There's very few people members of the working class in the Labour Party.
Okay, so well, tell us a bit more about your dad. What unions was he in, and why was he so interested in the party?
I think he was in the TGWU.
Transport General Workers.
Yeah. He worked at Avon Rubber in Melksham. And as I say, when he was very active in the Labour Party in the 50s and 60s. He was also involved in the mutinies in the British Army at the end in 1945. I don't know if you know anything about that.
No, tell us.
Well, in 1945, my dad was in Burma. Well,
that's Myanmar, they call it now, don't they? With Aung San Suu Kyi and the problem with the Rohingyas right now, but this is back in the 50s.
Yeah.
It was originally...
No, it was in 1945.
In the 40s, right. And this was originally a British colony.
Yeah, but what happened was when my dad was on territorials in the 30s, so he was called up immediately, the war broke out. And in those days, what they did, they joined for 3 years or the duration of the war. Well, in 1945, when the war finished, and because it finished so sudden in the Far East, because the Americans dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, nationalist groups took over all the old colonies, Indonesia, which had been Dutch, French Indochina, which is now Vietnam, and Malaya. And because the Japanese just surrendered, nationalist groups, like Ho Chi Minh people in Vietnam, took over. And they wanted to disarm the nationalist groups and give the colonies back to either the French, Dutch or the British.
Right, so there was immediately a problem at the end of the war, a competition between the occupying forces and the indigenous people.
That's right, yeah. But because this is a thing that they kept quiet, but because, like, the soldiers weren't that political, but they had joined to fight in the war and the war was over.
So to fight the Japanese or the Germans or the Italians or whatever.
So they didn't see why they had to go and give. What's it? So about 2/3 of the British Army in India and Burma went on strike. They refused to get sent to Malaya or French Indochina or Indonesia. And in the end, the colonial powers rearmed the Japanese to put down the nationalists.
So how far up the chain of command did that go then? Was this officers as well involved, or was it just enlisted men?
No, it's just troops.
Yeah.
But I was in the army. If you can't get the troops to do anything, then you can't do anything. Officers can't do everything.
Yeah, maybe they should send the officers to do it on their own, eh?
Yeah.
So your dad was involved in that. Were there consequences?
No, there's too many. And, of course, by this time it was a Labour government under Attlee. So they didn't push it that much. They just found other ways around the problem.
Okay, so when your dad came out of the army, what did he get involved in then?
He worked for my granddad for a bit in a cycle wear workshop, and then because of a family problem, he left that and went to work for Bath Avon, to Avon Rubber.
Okay, but how about for you then? So did you start in hospitals, or was it a while before you were working there?
No, I left school at 15 with no qualification. And I worked, first of all, I worked in the garage. Then I did a 2-year apprenticeship in supermarket managing. I'd hated it. So when I finished that, I joined the army.
Oh, crikey. So, you followed in your dad's footsteps in the army. How did you find that? Was it time of national service, or
No,
you volunteered?
No. National service was over by the time I joined.
So, okay, what regiments were you in? What did you do in the army?
I was in the Royal Corps Signals. And so I mainly did switchboard, telephone switchboard, teleprinters. That was basically it.
And were you involved in any of the conflicts at the time?
Only in Northern Ireland, right at the end of my service.
So what was happening over there?
This was the outbreak of the current round of troubles in 1970. And we got sent there in 1969. But then it was mainly street riots. And sort of the police. The problem with Northern Ireland then is there was the police, and there was a group called the B Special, which is kind of a police militia, and they were completely Protestants. Their ideals was of controlling areas was they had armoured cars, and you've got to remember they're a police force, and they used to drive around shooting all the windows out of the Catholic areas.
Crikey. So how did the army fit in, or didn't it, with the police force in Northern Ireland in the early parts of the Troubles?
Well, what happened was because the police couldn't control the situation, they put the army on the streets. And when I was there, it was a Labour government. And when we went on the streets, what people forget now is the Catholics come out and give us cake and coffee and that lot because they seen us as protecting them from the police force. And it was only when the government changed that... and because of the link between the Tory party and the Austro-Unionists, that's when they started clamping down on the Catholics much more.
Well, that's interesting because that's happening today as well, isn't it? Right now, we've got this deal that's been done between the Ulster-Unionist Party and the Conservatives to keep them in power, even though actually it's a minority government we've got with the Conservatives.
So, yeah, that's right, yeah.
OK, so what was it like on the ground then? Did you have to were you actually out on the streets, or as I imagine in signals, you'd be in some barracks somewhere or whatever, quite safe?
No, I was on the ground at times. One of the things that we used to do is, because signals is communications, we used to do post runs around Belfast, and I used to go with the driver with some machine gun to protect him, sort of thing.
And what was the reaction from the public? Was it similar in the Catholic areas in Belfast or the Protestant areas, or different?
At the time, there wasn't that much things like sniping or stuff like that. It was mainly street demonstrations, which used to be quite big. And both sides used to have a go at the army now and again.
What did actually seeing what was going on the ground over there, what did it teach you about the roots of the conflict and maybe how to sort out things in Northern Ireland?
I was more sympathetic to the Catholics, basically, because...
Why?
Because I actually talked to some of the people we arrested, and I had this conversation with this kid we had arrested, who was Catholic, and they had burnt out a bakery. And talking to him, I said, "Why did you burn that bakery?" And he said, "Well, they had a sign saying there were jobs going there. But when he went there, they asked him, the first thing they ever asked you was what school you went to. And because it's segregated education. And if it's a Catholic school, there's no vacancies. Because most of the businesses were owned by Protestants and they wouldn't employ Catholic workers.
It was a unique sort of situation, actually, in Northern Ireland, because most of the towns had completely separate businesses for Catholics, not just the churches. You know, you might get your cobblers, your supermarket, almost every type of business you can imagine, your butchers, etc., there'd be a Catholic one and a Protestant one. And the Catholics would use one and the Protestants use another. A lot of people don't realise that.
Yeah, the big thing was housing, council housing. In council housing, single Protestant people would be, a single person, Protestant, would be given a house in front of Catholic families. And they used to fix it so because of the votes. It always was. There was a joke in Derry that every election half the Protestant graveyard voted because they'd never been taken off the register. And people would turn up and vote in their names.
Crikey. Well, I mean, that was at the roots of a lot of people don't realise that actually the whole sort of electoral politics and whether you could vote or not was at the roots of a lot of the troubles.
Yeah, you also had, which is, I think it died out in Britain, in the rest of the UK in 1946, is businessmen had two votes. They had a vote for where they lived and a vote where their business was. That was general in British politics, but I think they got rid of it in 1945 in the rest of the UK.
Amazing. Anyway, so after the army?
I went and got a job. I worked in a geriatric hospital for about 2 or 3 years. And sort of, I was part of the first strike in the National Health Service ever.
Why was that?
Because I was an ancillary worker, I was a ward orderly, and the money was really bad. So we came out on a national strike, and it was the first strike ever in the National Health Service. It was a national strike.
What was it like working in those days? Because I understand in the 60s and early 70s, it was actually quite easy to get a job if you could, if you didn't like your boss, unlike today. In fact, it's the opposite of today. If you don't get on with your boss now, you've just got to bite your tongue and knuckle down because it's difficult to get another one. But back in the late 60s, early 70s, you could walk out one job into another, couldn't you?
It used to be a lot different. You didn't have the industrial protection. Like, there's no industrial tribunals and you could get sacked on the spot. But how it's different today is even in places I worked with the management on our necks all the time, and no union, we wouldn't dream of not taking a dinner hour and working overtime without being paid, like they do all the time now. People work for their dinner hours and work loads of hours without being paid for it. Even though we were in ununionised places, we would never do that. We wouldn't dream of doing it. It was unknown. And the bosses would never ask us to do it either.
A different world, it sounds like.
It was a different world. And the other thing was people would cheat the manager and get sacked on the spot on a Friday. And we'd arrange to meet them in the pub on the Monday. And they say, I'm going down the labour exchange. We used to call it labour exchange in those days. And when they come in, you wouldn't say to them, have you found a job? You say, where are you working? Because it was so easy to find jobs.
Amazing. Yeah. OK, so what about Bath Press? What was that like to work there?
I left the NHS because the money was so lousy. And I got a job with Bath Press. I actually went there for a summer job, and then they kept me on. I wasn't a printer. I was a forklift truck driver, and I got trained. They were very strict on what I had to get a certificate to drive, British Safety Standard certificate. I sort of got interested in union work, and I worked my way up to the convener. So by the time I left, I was the convener.
Well, I mean, this is this enormous building. As you drive into Bath from Bristol on the A4 on the right-hand side, it looks like some sort of like derelict, completely derelict now, Bath Press.
Yeah, it's been shut down for a long time.
So what happened there? There was just no money in printing anymore?
Well, I think a lot of the work went to the Far East. For about 10 years, it was really working there. It was really sort of, sort of we had full orders and stuff like that. And then about 3 or 4 years before I left, it started getting rough. But I'd left before they closed down.
But I mean, Bath is a centre for publishing and printing. Well, I don't know about printing nowadays, but things like future publishing in Bath is enormous. A lot of these glossy magazines, I must admit, I pick them up and just put them down straight away because it doesn't seem to be much worth reading in them, that we get in Smiths and all around the country in newsagents and this kind of thing, are published in Bath at Future. What sort of things were being produced at Bath Press? Was it magazines,
No,
books?
it's books.
What? Just books. Oh, okay.
So 2/3 of the workforce were women because they would sew the ends up and sort of what I say. You had quite a sort of system. You had the craft workers, which was the printers, and they were top sort of thing. And then you had manual workers like me, semi-skilled, and then you had the women, basically. And when I went there was no woman on the union committee. It was all basically all craft. And I was the first semi-skilled worker to get on the union committee. And when I got a bit of influence, I suggested that we elect people to the union committee by section. And because some of the sections were entirely women, that means we got them onto the union committee.
Did it make a difference?
It did. We were quite well organised. We had a closed shop.
Right, so if you were working there, you had to be in the union.
That's right.
And, I mean, sometimes with the closed shop, people will say if you wanted a job in a place, in the old days under the closed shop system, you didn't go to talk to the manager. You didn't send a letter or your CV to the boss. You went to the union to get the job.
No, at Bath Press, the management hired people. We, now and again, influenced them to get rid of people, mainly on health and safety aspects. We used to take students on in the summer because of the holidays, and some of these students would get on the forklifts and drive about, and despite being warned several times, but they had no training on that lot, and people don't realise that in an enclosed area, forklifts are as deadly as a car, and if people don't know what they're doing, they sort of kill people. When I was working at Bath Press, they had introduced youth opportunity programs. Can you remember those? And in the southwest, 3 of these kids were sent by the job centres to work on various sites, which weren't as strong in health and safety as we are, got killed in 1 year.
God. I mean, the other thing, of course, with the forklift is you could easily overturn the thing if you haven't got the right, because I imagine a few pallets of books can weigh a ton almost.
What you got to watch is when you're driving forklifts, it's the higher the forks go, the more weight goes on them. It's a thing. If you're lifting something down from high, what is it? And I have trouble with my hands because you can't drive forklifts and wear gloves out in the cold because you know how once you're a skilled driver, you tell by the weight through the controls whether it's going to tip or not. And if you wear gloves, they don't do that. So I have problems with my fingers now and again because they got so cold, basically.
It is a different world. We said that earlier. But, I mean, the idea of thousands and thousands of books being printed and published every month in Bath. Nowadays, what is Bath for? I mean, the Romans used to love the spa and everything, but where's the industry? What's happened to it?
It's all... let me tell you about the council. The council in Bath are mainly Lib Dems and Tories. The Tories control at the moment. And they're interested in 3 things. Tourists, students, and people coming in from outside to do shopping in the luxury shops. Bath is very different than when I was growing up.
Because that's funny because none of those are the people that actually vote them in. The tourists don't have a vote. Most of the students are from outside the city, and only if they're registered will have a vote. And the same with the shoppers, most of them from outside the city. Yeah,
but that's how the wealth is made, because there's no... Like, when I was a kid, we used to have Stodderton Pits in Bath, which was one of the biggest crane makers in the world. And they used to be all along the river. But it's all luxury housing now.
Amazing. So... I suppose I don't want to be too cynical, but I wonder if the council are just thinking, well, we just want money coming into the city from outside so that we can then tax it. And is that their thinking?
It's just the way it's grown up, and most of the council are businessmen or attached to, There are jobs, but they're Mickey Mouse jobs, basically, sort of just above the minimum wage, mainly people young, 0-hour contracts. Even some of the big employers. My son worked at a hospital for a time on a 0-hour contract until he managed to get a proper contract and work full-time there.
So is there any industry left in Bath?
Very little. The two biggest employers in Bath now is the university and the National Health Service.
After Bath Press, was there anything that made you decide, right, I've had enough at Bath Press? Could you see it going down? Was that the reason?
No, what happened was I saw an advert for an access course. So I applied, and I did from the access course, I went to university and got a degree in industrial relations. Right.
So that's interesting. So as a mature student?
That's right.
Actually at Bath University?
At Bath University, yeah.
And how did you find that? How long was it?
It was a 1 year on the access course, was at Bath College. And then it was supposed to be a 4-year course on the industrial relations course. But they waived a year for me because the third year was a placement. But he decided to get personal experience, but he decided being a convener of a major print factory for a long time was enough to... so I didn't do the year's placement.
I mean, before we skip completely away from Bath Press, as a convener, what sort of things were you doing?
Mainly health and safety issues.
Because nowadays it's very different. A lot of times people are afraid to raise health and safety issues either in hospitals or on building sites because they fear of being blacklisted. And yet, to you, it was your bread and butter.
Yeah, I was never frightened of the management. And sort of I would argue with them. And sometimes we had disagreements at union meetings, but we used to have the factory meetings with everybody there. I moved it, we should have support the Wapping dispute, which was a big print strike. But there was a lot of antagonism between general print, which we were in the newspapers. So they voted not to support it. And so I lost quite heavily. And then somebody else sort of wanted me moved as a convener. They wanted to do it. But on the vote, sort of 98% of the people in the meeting voted for me. And I asked some of them afterwards why they voted for me, why they had disagreed with what I'd proposed. And they said, well, we may disagree with you, but we know that you will go and argue with the management on our behalf, sort of thing.
Maybe you could talk a bit about Wapping, because that was enormous, wasn't it? I mean, I know there were even differences between print unions and journalism unions, and it was really all about Rupert Murdoch's decision to move out of Fleet Street to Wapping.
Well, at the time, before Wapping, printers were I was in SOGAT, which was a print union, and we were very, very strong. Even in general print, we were strong. So Thatcher decided to break the back of the print unions, and that's what she did. But I went up a few times to the picket lines, and the picket lines were really quite rough. There's one night where the police beat up so many people and injured so many of the pickets, and a crowd supporting them. They brought in another police force to investigate them, and the other police force, I think it was Surrey or somewhere, wanted police officers charged with everything from attempted murder to assault. But then when the first group come into court, it took so long for the inquiry that the judge ruled that too long had gone by for these police officers to get a fair trial, sort of thing. So the whole case collapsed.
Wapping, do you think it was just a kind of Luddites? Because a lot of it was to do with the new technology, wasn't it?
It was partly. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was a continuation of Thatcher's aims to destroy the trade union movement. But
what Rupert Murdoch was doing is he was introducing what we would now call just desktop publishing. rather than the old hot metal system where you'd get you probably know the terminology and the jargon better than I do.
Well, we changed at Bath Press at this period from hot metal to more computer-centred printing without a problem. And it could have been done without all this hassle. One of our problems was, like I said, I might get sued, but Brenda Dean, our General Secretary, had made secret deals with Murdoch. And so we were fighting with one hand tied behind our back, basically.
So your General Secretary, your union's General Secretary, had got secret agreements with the management? Yeah,
she wasn't interested in the strike whatsoever. She's now a senior member of the British Airport Authority.
Right, interesting. So what was at the nub of the Wapping dispute then, if it wasn't about the change of technology and the control of the print unions over?
Well, it's basically about breaking the back of the trade union movement in this country. You had the miners and you had the printers, and they were probably the two strongest sections.
Oh, OK.
So they broke the miners and they broke the printers as well.
That was all during the 1980s. What year are we talking about?
I don't know. Well, the miners' strike was 84, 85. And Wapping was after that.
So back to Bath, back to you, and your, I suppose, in a way, it was like a busman's holiday doing an industrial relations degree.
It was harder than I thought. I thought that, I could go, and because I'd be driving a forklift in the cold for 8 hours, you get really tired, and I thought sitting about in the university would be easy, but it wasn't. I was tired working at the university. The other thing that surprised me at university was I thought there would be arguments and debate between the students and the lecturers. But when I was at university, what surprised me was only the mature students would ever raise problems and argue points. The younger students were, I don't know why, but they very rarely spoke.
Were they a bit
class.
Docile, do you think? They're not really got inquiring minds, or what was going on there?
I don't know. Part of my course, because it was an industrial relations course, I had to do it in the School of Management. Some of the course was on negotiations, or industrial law, and I used to share the classroom with students who were doing the business management course, and they were mostly sons and daughters of people who were managers and stuff like that. I used to call them Thatcher's children.
So in a way, they're being taught how to beat the unions in a negotiation, aren't they?
Partly, yeah. But they weren't. They surprisingly weren't very good at it. Well, when we're doing industrial law or negotiations, we'd get a case study. And the lecturer, we had a barrister doing industrial law teaching us, and she would give us a case study, and then she would give us rows. So we would talk about a dispute in a factory, and she would say, you're the convener, you're the manager, you're the personnel manager, so on and so on. And I managed to, I didn't mind what I did, and because I'd been in part of the negotiation team, I used to read the case study religiously over the weekend and check all the facts, so I knew what I was doing. But we had this one guy who was one of these Thatcher's children, and he was a managing director, and he came in on Monday morning, and he said, well, I'm going to sack all the workforce. And the barrister said, well, didn't you see on page 2, they had a big order coming up, and it was really skilled work, and it'd take them a year to retrain anybody. So it's those sort of things. I did enjoy university, I must say.
I suppose, did you sort of skip A-levels then and O-levels when you left at 15? You know,
I had no qualifications whatsoever.
Right, great. So you went straight to do the degree.
I did an access course. You had to do an access course. But I thought the access course was good, because when you went for an access course, what you got to think about is you're dropping out of mainstream work with a family, doing a year at college, and then going to university. But what they did in Bath is they interviewed you for the university place at the same time as they interviewed you for the access course. So there'd be somebody from the college and somebody from the university. And you would get a place if you passed the access course, basically. You were told you had a place. So you worked hard at the access course. You had an automatic place at the University of Bath.
How did you feel then doing a proper degree after having not had these sort of qualifications people normally need to go to get there, having done the access course?
The worst thing about it was my maths and English was and my spelling is atrocious.
Yeah.
But I realised quite early on how to work it. And because I've been part of negotiations, I was quite good at looking at both sides of an argument. And that was really vital because when you write essays, I don't know if you've been to university, you have to put both sides of the argument. And I was good at that because when you go into negotiations in a factory, you try to work out what the management are going to sort of argue. And it's quite strange because when I left Bath Press, for the whole time at university, let me go back and drive my forklift in the summer, as long as I didn't do any union work. And in a weird way, they were proud of the fact that one of their workers had gone to. They said we did it because we had such a rough time in negotiations. You learned so much. You got into university doing an industrial relations course. After that, what do I do after that?
Because suddenly, you're not at Bath Press anymore, are you? You've got your industrial relations degree, but you're not actually a convener anymore.
No. I think when I started the degree, my idea was to go and get a job with a union. But by this time, Thatcher, the union's membership was falling. They needed less full-timers and that lot. So I went to work at Big Issue as a legal worker, and I become skilled in benefit law and housing law, and which I taught myself on the job, basically. And I
was this for the actual Big Issue vendors?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They, I had nothing to do with the magazine. I was their legal worker, and I used to cover the whole of Southwest, all the way down to Plymouth and up to Gloucester and everything in between. And I used to turn up and help them out with housing, benefits, and when they come into conflict with the criminal justice system, which they did quite a bit. And then I left there because basically I got fed up with people 20 or 30 years younger than me who I was working with dying, basically, because street homeless people die at quite young ages. And so I then went to the Citizens Advice Bureau as a legal worker, not as a volunteer. I was paid by them, or I was paid by the Legal Aid Board, actually. And mainly I did tribunals, representing people at tribunals over here in Bristol. Okay, so if someone is either been sacked or threatened with something at work... it's mainly benefits I did.
Okay.
Yeah. I've done a couple of industrial tribunals, but it's mainly benefit tribunals. And most of it would be about... So people have attended medicals and found fit for work, and we would go and argue that they weren't fit for work, basically. Okay, what about some of the activism that you've been doing since the Citizens Advice Bureau? I mean, Bath Against the Cuts. We hear in Bristol from time to time about BADACO, I think they're called, Bristol and District Anti-Cuts Alliance, but we don't hear much about Bath over in Bristol. So what's going on over there? Well, we formed Bath Against the Cuts in 2010. And we get people from all different persuasions, everything. Conservatives? No conservatives. We get a couple of Lib Dems, Green Party, Labour Party people, anarchists. Anarchists were people who helped to set it up. And we get on quite well. Like, you don't have the infighting in Bath that you do in Bristol. The real infighting in Bath politically is between different sections of the Labour Party. but So we've been working on that. We worked on several things.
I mean, hang on a minute, though, because you can be against the cuts, but surely you must understand that the government, after the bailout of the banks in 2008, just simply doesn't have the money to spend anymore.
I don't believe that. They caused the banking crisis. Capitalist bankers called the banking crisis. And they're asking the most vulnerable people in society to pay for it. And saying we're broke is ridiculous. In 1945, when my dad came back from the war, Britain was broke. The Americans had withdrawn any aid. And there was massive austerity then. But that government still demobilised 6 million people from the armed forces, built masses of council houses, created the National Health Service, and created a welfare state. Now Britain is 5th richest country in the world, and we can't afford anything. And bankers are still getting massive bonuses, people who caused the problem in the first place, but people who are ill or vulnerable are being asked to pay for the crisis. Sorry about that rant.
That's all right. So give us an idea of the sorts of people who are involved in Bath Against the Cuts and, what the objectives and aims are.
It's mainly to fight any cuts because we realise that what authorities do is they play one section of people off against the other. So if you say we prefer these cuts rather than that cuts, you're playing into their hands. So we have a policy. We've learned to what we've done. We've stopped them closing the library. We stopped them withdrawing money from the Citizens Advice Bureau. We kept some sort of kids' centres open. We've done stuff on the bedroom tax. What we're quite good at is there's a rule in Bath, the council rule. If you can get 1,000 signatures, I think, you get a chance to address the council. Now, you must discuss it in a council meeting. So we're quite good at that. And what we do is we get people to speak in a council meeting, but at the same time have a demonstration outside. And so that's how we work, basically. And we're quite good at mobilising people.
So does Bath have its own city council and the North East Somerset Council separate?
No, it's Bath and North East Somerset Council. And the Bath bit is made up of Lib Dems and Tories. There's one Labour councillor from inside Bath, from one of the old council estates, but he was the first Labour councillor from inside the seat for 15 years.
Well, why has Labour failed so dismally in Bath then, do you think? Although it seems to be coming back maybe recently, but...
It's come back a bit. I think the biggest mistake they made is in the 60s and 70s, they took council estates for granted and tried to put all their effort into more middle-class areas. And the Lib Dems were very good. At the time, they had a sort of focus on social housing estates, and they were quite good. You didn't see Labour until an election, but the Lib Dems did a lot of work in between.
Also, you're on the Trades Council, aren't you? What's your role there?
I'm a chair.
Chair of the Trades Council. OK, so tell us a bit about Bath Trades Council, because that's the idea of getting all the different unions in the city all together in one place, maybe once a month. Yeah?
That's right, yeah. We're quite small now. When I first went on the Trades Council in 1972, we had 60-odd delegates, and the local paper would send a reporter along to the meetings. Now we're down to about 10 delegates. But we do some stuff. We had a couple of years ago, we had a very good education day on the miners' strike because it was the anniversary, which drew 200 people. Recently, we had a day school on fascism and racism, and we showed films and had talks. I did a talk on Cable Street.
What's Cable Street?
Cable Street is when Oswald Mosley and the British Union of Fascists tried to march through the East End of London in 1936 and got beaten by the people who stopped them marching. It was quite well attended, and what we did especially was we found the Syrian refugees who lived in Bath, and the women, they did Syrian food, and we paid them, sort of thing. And then they brought their kids in, so we had a party for the kids at the end.
So who's on the Trades Council now then? Which unions appear?
Mainly from the university, UCU, NUT. We got quite a few, like, I don't represent a union branch on the Trades Council. I'm a life member. The TUC in London made me a life member because of my services to unions in Bath. So we had a couple of people who are life members. Somebody from the FBU. We have tried quite hard to get other unions involved, but without much success.
I suppose it's just a symptom, really, of the scaling down of industry in the city.
Yeah, we get far more people to anti-cuts meetings than we do to the Trades Council, unfortunately.
What's on the horizon with the cuts in Bath then?
The council are saying they need to make more cuts, but they haven't said where they are yet. They're really annoyed that we stopped the move in the library. What Bath Council have got a habit of doing is making a decision without consulting anybody. Then there's an outroar of people, and then they consult. And when they were going to move the library, they were just going to move it. And there was an outcry, and then they had to consult, and people had to vote, and 90% of the people voted to keep it where it is. And they're very annoyed about that. Sometimes they get away with stuff. Last year, there was a big campaign around Virgin Health getting lots of the services in Bath. And we had marches and we got hundreds of signatures, but they just ignored us. They just give the contract to Virgin Health in the end, and that's run into trouble now.
Oh, really? What's happened?
The computer system isn't working.
So what are Virgin doing? I mean, my own personal experience with Virgin is they are appalling, disastrous people. They certainly shouldn't be anywhere near health, because obviously this is potentially a question of life and death. My experience with them was with on the phone, where they just simply were impossible to get hold of. Number one, you pick up the phone, you could be on there for half an hour trying to get through to speak to somebody, you couldn't, even though they're supposed to be delivering a phone service. And then when I decided, look, I've had enough of this, then they kept sending me these bills for hundreds of pounds. So they were impossible to speak to. All they seemed to be interested in doing was fleecing me, personally, and actually delivering nothing for it. So if they're involved in what way are they involved in health?
They do most of the services now which aren't being done by the hospital, and they're taking bits of the hospital service over as they go.
So what's that then?
Adult care, mental health, children's care, everything. I'm not the best person to talk about this, because we got a woman, I won't give her name because I'm asked her permission, but who's on our anti-cuts campaign, who knows it backward. And
maybe we'll get her on in one of the future weeks.
Yeah, she's run a campaign called Defend the NHS, and she was the mainstay of the person who fought Virgin Health. But
personally, if I had to deal with Virgin Health over my own personal health, I would be trying to go anywhere except to them.
They are pretty bad, and they've been pretty bad. What was it? The thing is, they only come in to bid for contracts because they think they can make a profit. And some things in society, they shouldn't be made for profit because they cut corners.
Now, also going on at the moment is the controversy over Fox Hill. This isn't directly, maybe, I don't know if you're involved in it or not, but it's not the council, it's Curo Homes that want to knock down a load of actually rather nice council housing or housing association places up at Fox Hill. Can you just take us through what's going on up at Fox Hill?
Well, Fox Hill is an estate, quite a nice estate. It used to be council housing until Curo took it over, or Somer, but the same company. Somer took it over, and then but they moved into Curo. And when they were Somer, they were only interested in social housing, and they control all the old council housing in Bath. But they're now trying to break into the private market. Next to the Fox Hill estate is an old MOD place, Ministry of Defence, and Curo's got control of that, and they're building private housing on there. But they want to knock the council estate on. They're going to replace some of the housing, but not all of it.
Let's just get this clear. Is Curo a housing association or not?
It's a housing association, but they've set up a separate company to run their private housing. There's been an outcry from the tenants. We've been helping them.
So how are the tenants going to be affected then?
Well, it depends on the rule as far as I understand it. If you're an old council tenant who got moved over to Somer, you have more rights than people who've actually become Curo tenants since. So they have certain rights. People who've been Curo tenants up till 2011 have certain rights, but not as much as me, because I'm an old council tenant who lives in a Curo place. And then, as far as I know, since 2011, people who've taken Curo home since 2011 have no rights at all.
So does that mean that they just simply are going to be told you've got to go by a certain date, we're knocking your house down?
Well, at the moment, it's a long-term thing. At the moment, it's all on hold because of our lobbying, and because, surprisingly, we got a lot of help from a new Lib Dem MP who beat the old Tory MP at the last election.
Who's that?
Vera Hobhouse. She's been quite helpful. What we've done is we've got ourselves a film called Dispossession. I don't know if you heard about it. It's a film made about what's happening in London and Glasgow with the attack on social housing, and the director's been down. And they're making a film about Fox Hill at the moment. We've shown the film twice in Bath and got 250 people to each showing. We showed it on Fox Hill and got in a church, and we had to turn people away. Because of our lobbying, the decisions have now gone to Sajid Javid, Secretary of State for the Environment. And the council have given them permission. They've got through the first planning stage. So Curo have given them the go-ahead.
I mean, how many people are affected?
600 houses, I think it is.
Crikey. And, I mean, you would expect, if you're a tenant in that sort of situation, that you would immediately be offered an equivalent flat in the same area.
Well, there's been a lot of, Curo's consulting more now because they're in trouble, and they have to, and there's a chance that Sajid Javid will say, no, you can't do what you're doing. Before the Glenfell fire, it would have gone through on the nod, but the government are very careful now.
Because this is a regeneration. This is a regeneration scheme, they call it.
That's what
But actually, you know, in Ladbroke Grove, they talk about these things as demolition schemes.
Yeah. The like I've been doing quite a lot of research since this come up, and this Saturday we've got a woman speaking at Bath University, a woman called Anna Minton, who's written a really good book called Big Capital about what's happening in London.
Yeah, she's author of Ground Control as well.
Ground Control as well, yeah, I've read that as well. And
which is about the privatisation of our city centres.
Yeah.
Like we've got in Bristol, you know, Cabot Circus, Broadmead. You know, you don't get any ordinary police. This is private police walking down this street. And if they don't like the look of you, they can just get rid of you.
And one of the things I'm doing, I'm organising a housing conference in Bath in the spring to look at the whole thing of social housing. One of the things I discovered when I started looking into the whole thing about social cleansing, we call it, is that you have villains and heroes on all sides. Like some of the Labour councils in London are some of the biggest
villains.
Villains, yeah.
I'll say that word.
Haringey is actually been really bad. They're clearing council estates just like that. So the film is really good, and we're planning to show it in Bristol quite soon.
Well, it sounds to me as if there's some real bonuses you've got in Bath, I suppose, from cutting out a lot of this left-wing infighting by trying to include everybody. what message would you have for people who are concerned about that? Because I certainly look at the right and the Conservatives, even the neo-Nazis. They don't really seem to squabble with each other very much, but the left always seem to be. It's a bit like the People's Front of Judea and the Judea People's Front in Life of Brian. They're forever sticking knives in each other's backs, and sometimes that just means that they leave the Tories to just get on and do whatever they want.
I think how we work on Bath, or what I would encourage people to do, is if you're in campaigns, you work with people and focus on what you agree on, not what you disagree on. And we also have this thing in Bath of we do quite a lot of direct action, but because we got a broad-based thing, some people are frightened of getting arrested or taking on the law or stuff like that. So we're fine with that. People do what they want to do, and we don't sort of cast aspersions on people who won't get arrested or stuff like that. Or
So give us an idea, an example of some direct action. What do you mean?
A few years ago, during the coalition, Clegg come to Bath to do a meeting, and he turns up, and they had booked the Guildhall. And we didn't block the entrance, but we were very close to the entrance with all our banners and that lot. And this police sergeant come up and said we had to move around the corner so Clegg didn't see us. And we refused to move, basically. So he said, so I asked him where he had got what authority he was using. He said, I've been told from on high that you have to move. So I said, so God told you we got to move up. So he goes away and he comes back with a woman who was power dressed in a suit, about 35. And she started going on. We had to move. And I thought she was one of Clegg's aides. So I asked her who she was, and she flashed a pass at me, which I couldn't get. And as she done that, I know she had a pistol underneath her jacket. So I guess she wasn't one of Clegg's aides. In the end, she was a superintendent from the Parliamentary Protection Squad. But we just refused to move. Some people were a bit nervous, but to tell you the truth, the rest of the police there weren't bothered. They didn't want any trouble. They were quite okay. In fact, when I wanted to write down this woman's details, I always carry a pen, but I don't have a pen with me. So I said, anybody got a pen? And this young copper who I'd been sort of talking to gave me his notebook to write down the details. So we unfortunately had an arrest that night. But and the guy got a conditional discharge after 2 years of it going through the courts. So we do that. We've blocked shops. But we did a thing on zero-hour contracts in Bath. But what was surprising, as soon as we turn up somewhere, do you know Bath at all? There's a posh shopping centre just by the stations. Well, when they first built that, the authorities wrote to us saying we'd never be allowed to demonstrate in there. But we've managed to get in there a few times now, mainly by sort of saying we're going to have a demonstration there and not turning up. So after 2 or 3 weeks of that, the police don't turn up, and we do. But it's not to give them their due. The police in Bath aren't that bad. We haven't had that many problems with them. We've had more problems with security guards.
Private security, yeah. I mean, that's what's happening more and more in our city centres, isn't it? You're getting private security people. But anyway, I just wanted to mention the sad death recently of Celia Hollingsworth. She died out in Greece, apparently attacked by dogs. She's a Socialist Workers' Party, and she was, I understand, quite active in Bath.
She was in our anti-cuts campaign and in Protect Our NHS. She was a really good communicator with people. She was good on the streets selling papers or on stalls. Like, I don't particularly like doing that. I'd rather do hostile meetings. talk to members of the public. It's just something in me. But she was really good at talking to people on the street. And we used to go out together at one time, about 10 years ago.
And she was working here in Bristol, I think, wasn't she?
She was retired. She retired last year, I think.
Yeah, so real sad to see her go. But anyway, John, I suppose for the youngsters nowadays, a lot of people are looking at the world thinking, well, we're finishing our university with £50,000 worth of debt. What message have you got for young people today?
Well, a lot of people say young people aren't interested in politics, but I disagree with that. Sort of, they don't join political parties except they joined the Labour Party in big numbers when Corbyn got elected. But they've always been really into single-issue campaigns. And when I've been involved in single-issue campaigns, one of the things I didn't mention is when I was younger, before I become ill, I was ill in the 2000s, I used to act as a legal observer on demonstrations, both here and abroad. And there are lots of people on those demonstrations. And you get young people on demonstrations. Now, it's sort of when we had the library demonstrations about the mover, there were loads of young people, all down to 6 years old and stuff like that. I would just say that to young people, sort of, I don't feel sorry for them, but it's harder for young people now than when I left school, I think. They get misused a lot, both by the state and their employers, much more than pensioners. Like I know pensioners, there's pensioner poverty, but the state had protected pensioners to a certain extent, mainly because we pensioners vote in large numbers, mainly for the right. And so I would say, if you believe something is wrong, join with others and fight it. And I'm not particularly bothered if they join political parties or just fight on campaigns around the environment or social justice or animal rights, or as long as they do something.
Now, I notice also you're wearing this T-shirt, the European Social Forum. I mean, this is a biggie at the moment, isn't it? Brexit as well. What do you make of all that?
This was 10 years ago. I went to the European Social Forum in Florence. On Brexit, I voted to remain, but I can understand those people who argued from the left that the European community is a capitalist club. But I think why I voted remain is because I've seen those people who were mainly advocating us leaving. And I think it's given us sort of the rise of racism and sort of hate crime and that massively. It's given every little fascist thing to be a big fascist sort of thing. And I do actually believe that this country benefits enormously by migrants from abroad and stuff like that.
But we have seen a massive cut in wages. We've seen a big cut in the number of jobs since we joined the EU.
I don't think that's because of migrants. I think it's because the capitalists have taken opportunities to do that. Like what the European community done to Greece was absolutely appalling. And
so if people want to follow your work and follow the Bath Against the Cuts, John, what should they do?
Come along to our meetings if they live in Bath, which is the first Tuesday every month at a pub called the Ram in Whitcomb.
Okay, and are you online?
Bath Against Cuts is online, yes, just put Bath Against Cuts in and you'll get some stuff back.
John Bampfylde, thanks very much for joining us on Dialect.
Okay.
And that was John Bampfylde, the second part of the interview with him, and you can hear the first part on the previous week of Dialect at dialectradio.co.uk. That's all for this week. Dialect's Bristol's first weekly MP3 podcast. You can download it to listen on your phone or in the car. And this week, a bit of a special because we're having for the first time, and we'll be doing this in succeeding weeks, the actual shoestring theme from the end of the shoestring programme. You might have noticed our theme tune is from the shoestring programme, which was recorded in Bristol back in the 1970s. And it's just out on DVD for the first time with network releasing. So you can find that whole series if you want now. And we're going to finish this week and in succeeding weeks with the outro theme from Shoestring. Dialects Bristol's first weekly MP3 podcast. You can download it to listen on your phone or in the car. And you can subscribe and listen the week before broadcast at dialectradio.co.uk if you like. Thanks to our guests this week, Enrique Anton Rivero and John Bampfylde. Also to studio engineer Dave Bazanko. Dialects of Bristol Broadband Co-op production. Catch us on Bristol Community FM 93.2 every Tuesday at noon, and anyone can contribute. You can get hold of us through the People's Republic of Stokes Croft, just off Jamaica Street, on 0117 909 6897. They're online at prsc.org.uk. You can volunteer with us or for hundreds of opportunities elsewhere in Britain via the National Volunteering website, do-it.org. If you've got the spare time, that is. That was Dialect, and I'm Tony Gosling, wishing you a very good week. Thanks for listening. Till the same time next week. Goodbye for now.